No, evidently not. No music for me. Not for the data scientist. I guess maybe because I'm too dry. Well, we'll see how that goes. Thanks for the introduction, Cyrus. As Cyrus said, I'm here today to talk about Moz's 2013 ranking factor study. And so let's just start out by defining upfront what a ranking factor is. As you all know, search engines are very complicated. They use many different factors or signals to determine which pages to rank in which order. For instance, they might use things like the words on the page, links pointing to the page, and lots of other things that we're going to discuss. They then have a bunch of search quality raters that determine which page is high quality or which one's most relevant to a given query. They send all of this stuff through a gigantic algorithm, a machine learning algorithm called a learning to rank algorithm. And then this then spits out the list of the ranked URLs, the 10 blue links that get returned to the user. And so the ranking factors, the ranking piece comes from this learning to rank algorithm. So what are some of the factors that a search engine would use? If we just have a search snippet here for this particular URL, search engine would use things like the actual string of the URL itself. It seems really simple and very obvious, but it's actually very important. They'll use the text on the page to determine what the page is about, and some other quality signals. Links pointing to the page are very important for determining how important the actual page is itself, how authoritative it is. These links are associated with anchor text. The anchor text is the word that is highlighted in the web browser that you actually click on. For instance, if the search query is movie reviews and the anchor text pointing to this page is movie reviews, then that could be an important relevance signal. And then they might use other things like social signals that we'll discuss a little bit later on. So as Cyrus said, the goal of this study is to determine which of these factors are the most important. And from an SEO perspective, in doing your daily job, it's important to understand which factors are the most important, which ones should you concentrate on, which ones should you spend your time on. And so it can be a bit hard to sort of disentangle this. We have a couple of different competing sources of information. We have what Google tells us is important. They may or may not say everything that is actually in the algorithm itself. They may have things in the algorithm that they don't talk about, and vice versa. We can go out and we can ask SEOs. We can ask all of you in the audience today who do SEO as part of your job what you think. You have a great body of knowledge that you've built up over time as you do your job about what works and what doesn't. And then we can actually go out and look at characteristics of sites that rank well. And we can run some correlation studies, and we can determine what are the characteristics of sites that cause them to rank higher or lower, or associated with ranking higher or lower. And in this talk today, I'm going to focus on these bottom two things, what SEOs say and the characteristics of sites that rank well. So to figure out what SEOs say, we ran a survey in mid-June, a couple of weeks ago. We polled 120 professional SEOs. Many of you are in the audience today. I want to say thank you very much for participating. We really appreciate the time and energy you put into answering the survey questions. It means a lot to us. Couldn't have been possible to present this data without you, so thank you very much. We got a really nice distribution of different size sites in the survey itself. Everything from very small local sites that have a couple of hundred pages, very few visits, all the way up to enterprise-wide sites that get millions and millions of visits and millions of pages. So we got a good distribution of different site types. And we also got a really good uniform distribution of different roles. Everything from self-employed consultants to consultants at large agencies or in-house marketers. So we really feel that this is a nice representative distribution of all the professional SEOs. The actual survey itself consisted of a bunch of questions that looked like this. We asked all of the SEOs to rate a number of different factors on a scale from 1 to 10 about how important they thought they were in Google's overall algorithm. We then take the average rating from 1 to 10, and we report that average rating in this today. The highest rated factors in our survey had average ratings of between 7 and 8, and lower factors that SEOs didn't think were very important had somewhere between 3 and 5. So just important numbers to benchmark as I start looking at some data shortly. To look at the characteristics of sites that ranked well, we ran a correlation study similar to the types of studies that we've run in the past. And I wanted to take a minute to go through some of the details of this year's data, because it's important. For this year, we have 14,000 keywords, or between 14 and 15,000 keywords that we took from Google AdWords. And we included all keywords that Google AdWords provided for all different categories, all different search volumes, because we really wanted this to be a broad representative sample. We then took all of these keywords, sent them through Google US, collected the top 50 results. These were depersonalized, delocalized organic results. We collected these in the same way that we collect the rankings for you in our web app, in our Pro app. And these are all run in the first week of June this year. This was after the Panda 2.0 update. So once we collect all of this data, then we go and we compute what's called correlations, or the mean Spearman correlation. So essentially what we do is for each keyword, we can compute a correlation, and then we average them all together. That's where the mean comes from, the average. And the Spearman correlation measures the extent to which increases or decreases in one factor are associated with increases or decreases in rank. The correlation value theoretically will go between -1 and 1. A negative value means that increases in whatever we're measuring are associated with decreases in rank, and a positive value is associated with an increase in rank. Because we know search algorithms are very complicated, we don't actually get correlation values that are even close to 1, because if we did, then that would mean that whatever single factor we were measuring the correlation for would be a perfect, would describe the search algorithm perfectly. And we know that that's not the case because it's very complicated. They have hundreds of different factors. Instead, what we see is values of between 0.1 and 0.3 are common. Our highest factors that we'll see are somewhere around 0.3 or above. Just wanted to give a shout out to Jerry and Mike, 2 data scientists on the Moz team. They worked very hard to collect all of this data for you, so thank you guys. Okay, so no correlation study would be complete without a slide that talks about correlation and causation. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this right now up front, because when we look at the data, it's important to interpret it correctly. And there's a difference between correlation and causation. For instance, when we compute a correlation, it says that one thing is related to another. It doesn't tell us whether there's actually some type of causal relationship. We need to bring additional sources of information in to make some determination about whether it's causally related. So for instance, if we look at link correlations, for instance, I'll show some data in a second that shows that links are correlated with higher rank. We might ask ourselves, well, is there a causal relationship here? Well, what additional source information do we have? Well, we know that Google has said that they use link information. PageRank was one of their first patents. It's a link-based metric to determine which pages to rank higher. And so SEOs think that links are important. So we can probably conclude pretty conclusively that there actually is some causal relationship here. If we look at a different factor, like for instance, the number of words on the page itself, and we see that, well, there's actually some correlation here too. And so we can ask ourselves, well, is this actually causally related? Do we actually think that there is a factor in the algorithm that is the number of words on the page? There might be, there might not be, but if there isn't, then we should hopefully be able to explain this correlation with some other type of causal relationship. For instance, the number of words on the page might be associated with higher quality content. Imagine a long in-depth blog post with some number of user-generated comments at the bottom. Higher quality content. Higher quality content gets more links, and links we know are causally related. So maybe the correlation between the length of the document and higher rank actually flows this way instead of actually being causally related. Okay, so diving into the data. So first up is links. Here are some correlation results for page-level links. So these are links pointing to a particular page. And we see that page authority has the highest correlation. In this data set, it's 0.38. This is the highest correlation of all of the factors that we looked at. I'll talk about page authority in a second, but moving on after page authority, we see that the next highest correlations are things like the number of linking C blocks, the number of IP addresses, the number of root domains. These are all link factors that measure the diversity of the sources that links are coming from. And so it appears as though Google is favoring links from a wide variety of different places. Page authority itself is a machine learning algorithm. It's something that we've developed here in-house at Moz, and it's specifically designed to have a high correlation with search position. So that's why we see these high correlation values. It's built into a lot of our tools. So you can go to, for instance, Open Site Explorer, and you can put in any page, and it'll tell you the page authority of that page, how important it is. And then you can look at the links that are pointing to that page, and you can see which ones are the most important. You can do this for your competitors' pages, see what important links they have that you don't have, use that for outreach. Okay, so moving on to domain level links. So these are links pointing to the actual domain or the subdomain that the whatever page is on. And we see a couple of interesting things here. Number one, we actually see higher correlation values for links pointing to root domains over subdomains. This is the first time that we've seen this. And I'm not sure exactly why this is. I have my own hypothesis, as that this is due to the prevalence of very large sites like Blogspot or WordPress, where there's lots of user-generated content on individual subdomains. So for instance, if we have some blog on Blogspot, it doesn't really tell us anything about how important that blog is, to know that there's a lot of links to the domain Blogspot itself. Instead, the number of links pointing to that subdomain would tell us something about how important that blog is. And so that's my guess as to why the number of root domains is higher correlation than number of domains. And then overall, we also see that the correlation values for domain and subdomain level links are smaller than they are for page level links. If we look at the survey, SEOs, everybody loves links. SEOs think that links are important. This is consistent with what we found in the data. And again, so the highest ranking factors that the SEOs thought were important were things like the number of domains pointing to the page, the number of domains pointing to the domain. So again, a diversity of link sources. One also interesting thing is popped up as number 3 was the linking page relevance. And so this is something that we didn't actually measure in the data, but what this says is this is how similar is the page that is linking, how similar is the source and target of the link. So this, when you're out there building links, it says that SEOs at least think that it's important to build links from pages that are similar. Okay, moving on to anchor text. Anchor text has always been a very important ranking signal, and we see very high correlations in our data to anchor text, both to exact and partial match anchor text. They basically have the same correlation value. What we mean here by exact and partial match, so if you imagine the search query, if your search query is Adidas sneakers, then exact match anchor text here means that the anchor text exactly matches the phrase Adidas sneakers. Partial match in this case would be just the word Adidas, would be a partial match for the query Adidas sneakers. Other interesting things that we see here are that if you look at these bottom 2 bars are the number of external pages with partial match anchor text, which is a 0.28 correlation, and the number of internal pages with partial match anchor text, which is 0.11. It's much, much lower than the external anchor text correlation. And so what this tells me when I look at the data is that it's really the anchor text of the external links that matters much more so than the internal links. Looking at the survey, we see that SEOs think that more so than the actual number of links that have the anchor text, that have partial or exact match anchor text, SEOs think that having an organic distribution of anchor text is most important ranking signal. And so what this organic distribution of anchor text means is that it's a blend of anchor text that is going to occur naturally. Things like branded keywords that people are naturally going to link with, unbranded keywords, generic words like click here and things like this. And this is a direct response to some of the algorithm updates that Google has done over the past year or two, the anti-spam updates, things like Penguin, where they're directly penalizing anchor text distributions that are overly commercial in intent. So when you're out there, if you have a choice about the anchor text of the link that you're building, make sure that it's something that would occur naturally. Okay, site speed. It's often been said that the speed at which your page loads is an important ranking signal. Google has had public statements about this, and so this year we decided to actually do a deep dive into this. And we partnered with this great company named Zoomph that has this tool that measures all sorts of things about how fast your page actually loads. And what we found, very interestingly, are that things like the document complete time, which is the total length of time to load everything that is required to actually show the page on the screen, or the render time to actually fully render the page, have basically no correlation, zero correlation with ranking. Instead, what we found is that the response time, both in Zoom's tool and in our own crawler, has a significant negative correlation. With some hindsight, this makes sense. When Google crawls a page, they don't actually load all of the assets that are required to completely load the page or render the page. They don't load all of the CSS and JavaScript files, all of the image files, and everything else that is required to totally render that page. And so they can't actually measure the document complete time or the total render time, but they can measure the response time. The response time here is basically the lag between when you first enter the URL in your web browser and it sends back that first very bit of data. The number of requests up here, this is the top bar. We found a very slight positive correlation. This is the total number of things that need to be requested to load the page, the total number of JavaScript and CSS files and images and all these other things. Our guess here is that this is correlation, not causation. Sites that have a more rich user experience, more complicated sites that are going to tend to rank higher, are going to tend to be more complicated, are going to have a larger number of requests. Now, just because site speed doesn't have a significant impact on ranking doesn't mean that you can ignore it. Jonathan Coleman has this great slide deck that I recommend you all take a look at, where he talks about the impact of site speed and the impact on users. And these are just two choice statistics from his deck. 40% of customers will abandon any site that takes longer than 3 seconds to load. Conversion rate drops by 7% for every 1 second of load time. So it's critically important from a user perspective how fast your page loads, how responsive your site is, even if it doesn't have a direct ranking impact. Okay, on-page factors. Back in 2011, when we did the previous version of this study, we got correlations that look something like this, where the TF-IDF correlation was 0.07. And TF-IDF is essentially a more sophisticated way of measuring how many times the keyword appears on the page. It's essentially the number of times the keyword appears on the page with some correction for how many times that keyword appears in a large corpus of documents, a very large collection of documents. So that keywords that appear very frequently are devalued in the TF-IDF score. This had a lower correlation than a number of characters in the HTML. It had a much lower correlation than page authority at that point, an older version of the model that was 0.28 2 years ago. When we look at the survey data this year, we get the SEOs think that keyword in the title tag is very, very important. This is our single highest average factor. The single most important factor, according to SEOs, is the keyword in the title tag. Keyword on the page, very, very high factor, as high as link-related factors. And so there's some disconnect between these low correlation values that we're seeing and what SEOs think. Keywords on the page are fundamental to search. And so sort of asking myself over time, why is this? Why are we getting these such low correlation values for these on-page factors when we think that they should be much higher? So I went out and did some research, actually read some literature, and found some more sophisticated ways of actually measuring the relationship between the keyword and the document. One of the things that actually is important in the literature is this thing called a language model. It's not important to understand what a language model is for the purposes of this talk. It's about 10-year-old technology. Here, in this context, TF-IDF is much older than that, and so it's a much more sophisticated way of measuring how related the keyword in the document is. If you're interested in these topics, I have a blog post that I just put out a couple of weeks ago that does a deep dive into these things. But for our study here then, indeed, we do see that the correlations do increase if we use a more sophisticated way of measuring how related the keyword in the document is. The language model correlation goes up to 0.15. It's a bit higher than the TF-IDF score of 0.13. I attribute this higher correlation value for the TF-IDF score versus 2 years ago as essentially being more careful and using a much larger collection of documents. The corpus of documents that we used was a couple of times larger than it was 2 years ago, and so I think that this has a significant impact on increasing this correlation. If we look at other tags on the page, we see something very interesting. So the first interesting thing is that the actual text in the body itself has the highest correlations. This is these top 2 bars. But then we also find relatively high correlations for the title tag, which we expected, the meta description, and the H1 tag. All have correlation values that are almost as high as the title tag and almost as high as the body text. So from a technical SEO perspective, don't ignore the meta description. Make sure that your pages have one, make sure your site has one, and make sure that it's relevant to the actual content on the page itself. If we look at other tags, H2 tag appears as though the correlations get very, very small. So it appears to only be the H1 tag that is the one that is taken into account. Looking at other on-page factors, these top 2 bars here, the number of characters in the HTML, again, we see relatively high correlation, basically almost as large as keyword in the title tag for the actual length of the document itself. And then the one that's right below it is the number of images, 0.07. I think that both of these are correlation and not causation. Sites that provide a richer user experience are going to tend to have more images on them. Focusing on these bottom 4 are all structured data markup. Schema.org markup, Google Plus markup, Open Graph markup. They're basically all 0 or very close to 0. So these things do not appear to be ranking signals yet. You may ask yourself, well, is this just because these sites just aren't implementing this type of markup and it can't actually be used as this ranking signal? And that indeed appears to be the case for things like Google Plus. Schema.org, about 10% of our data set had schema.org markup. Open Graph, 37% of the pages in our data are actually implementing Open Graph. So, but again, sort of Google Plus author markup down here at the bottom, 2.2%, tiny percentage of the data set. Does mean you can ignore it? It's not a ranking signal. I wouldn't. Google Plus author markup, if it's implemented properly, will give you an expanded search snippet. This will probably drive a higher click-through rate. So it's important to implement these, even if they don't appear to have a direct ranking signal yet. OK, so moving on to the actual URL. Exact match domain, partial match domain are things that often talked about SEOs. So this bottom bar here is exact match domain, 0.17. Here are the exact and partial match definitions are the same as I use for anchor text. The top bar is exact match domain. If it's a .com, is 0.20. These are basically the same correlations as we found 2 years ago. They really haven't changed in 2 years. The actual length of the URL itself appears to be negatively correlated. So, pages that are very deep in sites or have really long query parameters, things like this, tend to not rank as well. I don't know if this is causation or not. I'm just going to put it up there. If we look at the survey, SEOs didn't think that exact and partial match are very important. They gave average rank or average importance of between 5 and 6. If you think back to the links are 7+, keyword and title tag is 8+. So SEOs don't think exact match domain is very important. And so I was actually a bit surprised when we ran these exact match domain correlations, and they were basically the same as they were 2 years ago. And so we decided to do a deep dive into this. Based on some of the plots that Dr. Pete has produced from the MozCast data, we decided to actually look at the exact match domain percentage over time. And that's this here. So this is the percentage of URLs in the top 10 that are an exact match domain. And this goes all the way back to sometime last fall. It's on the left-hand side here, all the way up to the present. And so, indeed, we do see that the overall prevalence of pages with exact match domain is decreasing over time. If we overlay the correlation values, we see something very interesting where you kind of see this seesaw pattern, where we had high correlation values of 0.17, basically similar to what they are right now. Last fall, they actually decreased in the wintertime all the way down to something like 0.12. Then they increased again in the spring. So we can ask ourselves, okay, so what's going on here? Is this sort of a data anomaly? Sort of what's going on here, right? Well, you can go back and you can look. All right, well, let's go back here. So you can go back and, there we go. So you can go back and last fall, Matt Cutts, the head of Google's web spam team, sent out a tweet that says they're rolling out a new exact match domain algorithm that's going to affect 0.16% of queries. And indeed, right there is where his tweet was. And so we do see that this decrease in correlations that we saw from last fall to over the winter time is associated with this algorithm update. And so what's going on over here on the right-hand side? I'm not exactly sure what's going on over here, but what the data implies is that the pages that are ranking are actually increasing in rank. The fact that the correlations increase says that the pages that are the exact match domains that are continuing to rank are increasing in rank, even though the number of them is decreasing. And so what this tells me is that there's some removal of low quality exact match domains. We're weeding out lower quality exact match domains, and the ones that are remaining are continuing to rank just as well as they always have. Okay, moving on to brand metrics. We have this great tool at Moz called Fresh Web Explorer. It's been talked about a little bit today. It allows you to look at fresh mentions and fresh links to your site. And so we can go and use this to compute correlations. We actually see some fairly sizable correlations for fresh links to your domain and your subdomain. These are these top two bars. And also fresh mentions of your domain. So these are people that are mentioning your site, mentioning your domain without actually linking to you. So we see a correlation of 0.16. So this is, says that maybe brand signals are actually important. Or at least we can get reasonably high correlations. They're associated with ranking higher. If we look at the survey, much more so than RSS mentions. So this bottom bar here is essentially the analog of the fresh mentioned correlation data I just showed. SEOs don't think that this is very important. It's got an average ranking of between 4 and 5. Instead, SEOs think that the search volume for the brand and the domain is actually the important thing. This is something that we don't have access to. This would be a strong signal to the search engines that this word or this phrase is an actual brand that had higher search volume. Okay, social. Google+. We found really high Google+ correlations. This is the correlation for the number of +1s that your page gets. It's the same number that appears in a web browser when it says, this page has this many +1s, 0.30. Behind page authority, this was our second highest correlation of everything that we tested. It's higher than Facebook. Facebook 2 years ago was the second highest. It actually slipped a little bit. The number of tweets from Twitter is about the same as it was 2 years ago. Is this causation? I don't know if this is causation or not. We certainly know that Google is going to crawl Google+. In fact, they might not even need to crawl Google+. I mean, it's very conceivable that they have some API or some feed that just sort of feeds directly into their PageRank algorithm that says these are the links that were shared on Google+ and the number of times that they were shared. Links on Google+ are followed links, so they will pass link juice. So this could be a link. This could be just links. This could be something more than that. I don't really know. 2 years ago, when we got this high correlation with Facebook shares, I actually did a deep dive into that at that point and showed that actually most of this Facebook correlation could be explained by links. So it might be the case this time. I haven't redone that, but I'm going to leave that as an open question whether this is causation or not. Looking at the survey itself, SEOs didn't think that social is important at all. Actually, we get, Facebook shares 3.87. This is really low compared to most of the other factors that we surveyed. Number of +1s from Google+ is about 5. Again, these are really low. So SEOs don't think that social signals are important, but we actually find very high correlations. Okay, so some words of caution again. When you're looking at different correlation studies, the methodology actually matters. It's important to read the fine print. And this is especially important when you're comparing one study to the other. Search Metrics and Netmark both recently put out great correlation studies. Both of these groups did a great job. I highly recommend you all go and take a look at the results that they put out. Most of the results are consistent, but I wanted to talk for a little bit about some of the key differences between their results and ours. First, the Search Metrics study. They got a correlation value of 0.06 for the percentage of backlinks that include the keyword. This is very similar to our keyword in the anchor text. We have 0.29. We find anchor text is very, very important. And so you ask yourselves, well, why the difference between the two of these? Well, if you read through search metrics methodology, they excluded what they call navigational queries. This is a query where the user knows the website that they want to go to, but they're using the search engine to actually find the page itself. Many navigational queries are going to be branded queries. And branded queries are naturally going to have a lot of the brand word in the anchor text just organically. And so, is this the reason? We included navigational queries, we included branded queries, we included all queries. And so is this the main difference between their study and ours? I'm not sure. It's my working hypothesis. Netmark. If you look at their study, their single highest correlation was exact match domain at 0.43. Much, much higher than any correlation that we found in our data. However, if you read through the methodology, they use what's called the rank by serial correlation. Probably don't care about what the rank by serial correlation is. In this case, because exact match domain is what's called a binary variable, it's basically 0, 1. Technically speaking, rank by serial is actually the proper correlation to use in this case, instead of the Spearman correlation, which we used. However, the rank by serial correlation in this case is mathematically equivalent to the Pearson correlation, which is the ordinary correlation value that you typically compute. And so if you actually compute the Spearman correlation with their data, they get a value of 0.15, which is really comparable to our value of 0.17. I recognized this 2 years ago. I computed some similar rank by serial correlation values for exact match domain. And I decided at that point that it was a bit of an apples to orange comparison to sort of, here's a rank by serial value next to a Spearman value, and so we chose to use Spearman for everything just to make the data internally consistent. Okay, so what are some key takeaways here? Most of them can be summarized by looking at this pie chart. This is from the survey here in 2013. This is the overall makeup of Google's algorithm according to the survey. And these two biggest pieces right here, about 40% of the data are links. This is one place where the survey is very consistent with the data. SEOs think that links are important. We get our highest correlations to links. Links are so fundamental. This bottom piece down here, this is keyword, on-page keyword things. Keywords are so very, very important. We got a reasonably high correlation value with keywords by doing things a bit more carefully than we did 2 years ago. So keywords are so fundamental. One really interesting place where the survey and the correlations differed is social. SEOs don't think social is very important. It's down here at only 7% of the algorithm. It's the second from the bottom of all of these different categories, whereas we found some of our highest correlations with social value. So is this a causation thing? I'll leave that open. If we compare this pie chart from 2 years ago, from 2011 to this year, 2013, most of it actually stayed the same. One thing that decreased significantly, the biggest difference is domain level keyword usage. This is exact match domain, partial match domain. SEOs really think that exact match domain decreased in importance. And as we discussed in the data, we see a bit of a mixed signal here. The actual prevalence of exact match domains does indeed be decreasing. They appear to be less important as you look at the percentage, but their ranking ability is still as good as it ever has been. And then finally, some future predictions. This is, again, from the survey from this year. We'll see something very interesting here. So these top few bars, the factors that SEOs think to increase in most in importance over the next couple of years: perceived quality to users, authorship, structured data markup, social importance. All things that basically perceived value to users, how important this page, this site is to users. The things that they all think to decrease in importance are traditional ranking factors: exact match domain, paid links, anchor text, all expected to decrease. And so SEOs are really predicting that there's going to be some shift between what we consider generally to be traditional ranking factors and these new types of signals. So with that, I'll say thank you and open it up to questions.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to take your MC duties. I'll do my best Cyrus impression. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Rand.
Is that no? I should have had a sport coat on. Okay, so wait, can we go dive back into the deck for a
Sure.
sec? Is that all right?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
I'm sorry, you guys. I'm hijacking for my own personal purposes.
How far back do you want to go?
Let's go back into some of the correlations.
Okay.
So I wanted to look specifically at, okay. Yeah, go brand metrics.
Social?
Social. I think it was before that where you had the URLs
Uh-huh.
in domains.
Yeah?
Yeah, cool.
This one or exact match domain?
Yeah, let's see. So, okay, wait.
Right here. I'll give you the clicker.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Characters in HTML, number of images, schema.org, markup. Right. URL domain. Okay. So, emd.com, emd, URL length. So this is basically saying the longer your domain name is, generally the worse it performs in
Yeah,
rankings?
so the domain name length isn't actually on here itself. This is the actual full length of the page.
Oh.
But we found actually, I don't have it displayed here. I don't remember the actual number, but we actually did find something where the longer your domain name is, then that has a negative.
So just long in general bad?
Just long and generally bad, yeah. And if we do something similar for like the folder depth, the number of slashes, then we see negative correlation with that too.
Okay, got it. So then this one, fresh mentions of domain, right,
Yeah.
which you've got over there. This is essentially, if I were to do a search in Fresh Web Explorer for, in quotes, moz.com.
This is if you just search for Moz, the actual
name
domain
of the
name.
domain, not the mentions of the domain with the TLD.
Yes.
Interesting.
So here the domain name itself was our easy proxy for the brand of the domain. Actually getting the brand of the domain can be kind of hard, so.
Did we have to remove, did you guys have to remove like exact match keywords from this?
So this is just mentions of the domain. So this is not.
So let's say I owned like shoes.com.
Yes.
Would you just be looking at how many times shoes was mentioned?
Okay. Yes.
So maybe if we remove that, we'd see even higher correlations.
Possibly, I don't know.
Let's totally do it. You got nothing else going this week, right?
Except being here and participating in this great conference.
Okay, sorry. Then, so the social one is super interesting to me, but can we, you said we can't extract out, or we haven't extracted out yet, whether this might be due to linking stuff, like things that get lots of social shares also get lots of links?
That's something that is on my to-do list, is to essentially revisit the study that I did 2 years ago, where I looked specifically at the Facebook number, and essentially see how well these, how well is the number of plus ones actually correlated with the number of links, and can you explain this with links and.
Okay, got it. And then the last thing that I just wanted to bring up, which I know you mentioned, but I wanted to be just really careful for the audience here, which is that all of this stuff is how well do these things perform in Google, not does Google care about any of this or use it in their algorithm.
Yes, exactly.
So this has nothing to do with what's in Google's algorithm. This just has to do with how well does sites, pages like this do in Google's results.
Yes, and I think the social one is as a key indicator of that, right? So, Facebook is extremely high correlation. Content that tends to get shared on Facebook tends to be high quality content. It's going to have other things that it's doing right. Maybe the actual Facebook signal isn't an actual causation.
Yeah. Was there there was one more that I wanted to ask about. Hang on, I'm going to find it real quick. So the anchor text stuff, this one seemed interesting to me. So this is number of root domains to page that have an exact match, the number of root domains to page with partial match, and then external pages. These look really, really similar.
Yeah.
And so my general experience, right, as an SEO is the more diverse links that I get that have, and diverse domains that point to me and say my anchor text, that I tend to do better. This almost suggests to me, and I'm not sure if it does, but it almost suggested to me like, I wonder if Google is getting a little less picky about the, like multiple links from the same domain, like whether that's actually not counting as much, because it also looked like, if we go back, that the links to, like number of links wasn't that far off of, number of external links isn't that far off of C blocks.
Yeah.
So I sort of get this idea like, maybe I should get 4 more links from the New York Times as opposed to another link from time.com and WashingtonPost.com, but I don't know. I guess I'm just asking if that's a reasonable hypothesis to come up with?
That seems reasonable to me. Yeah, that seems
worth testing.
That seems reasonable to me. I mean, certainly, getting 4 links from a high-quality domain would improve your page rank or your Moz rank.
Because this is like the closest I've ever seen
this
links
is interesting.
and CBlocks.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You rock, man. This is amazing. I'll let Cyrus take it from here. Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Rand. Just one more question, Richard.
Thanks a lot, Matt. That was amazing. It's the anchor text correlation. Oh, Rand, the echo is horrible, isn't it? Yeah. The anchor text correlation, you looked at partial match and exact match. Did you look at no match at all? Like when people use click here or, whatever?
No, not explicitly. I think the closest we would have to being no match would be something like this, where it's just the raw number of links itself. But there's no reason I couldn't do that. Yeah.
I just think that's interesting because I come across a lot of link builders that say, build a natural anchor text profile by saying click here or saying exit or over there or whatever it is. So that would be a data point I'd be interested in.
Yeah, we could definitely run a correlation with just generic words like click here, something like that.
And Matt, you have a blog post coming out tomorrow with a lot of this data. And not to let the cat out of the bag, but I understand we're going to rerun a lot of this data again and release the full correlation data in a few weeks.
Yes, we're going to rerun all of this, and then we have a large section on our site right now from 2 years ago. We're going to be updating that sometime in the next couple of weeks.
All right, we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Matt.